Welcome to A Fair Share for Children, the third biannual Laureates and Leaders for Children Summit. I am Winnie Nyandeka, a national youth leader and an activist from Kenya. As the opening video illustrated, Laureates and Leaders for Children advocates for the world's most marginalized and vulnerable children. We are so pleased that you have made the choice to join us at this summit. By doing so, you are part of the solution for the emerging crisis impacting the world's children in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, it is my great honor to introduce the founder of Laureates and Leaders for Children, a decades-long champion for the rights of children, and 2014's Nobel Peace Laureate, Mr. Kailash Satyarthi.
Thank you. My dear children, Your Excellencies, fellow Nobel laureates, sisters and brothers. On behalf of the Laureates and Leaders for Children, I welcome you to this Fair Share Summit. The ongoing social and political crisis in the times of COVID is not only a health or economic crisis. This is the crisis of morality. It's a crisis of justice, a crisis of freedom, and it's a crisis of civilization itself. We have assembled here today to challenge the injustice, apathy, and complacency that will result in the tremendous loss of human freedom and dignity if we don't act now. We had hoped that our common pain and suffering would teach us a sense of shared responsibility for one another. However, it has shamefully exposed and exacerbated our divisions and inequalities. The global COVID response has been disgracefully unequal, unjust, and immoral. The Fair Share report issued by the Laureates and Leaders for Children today has revealed that only 0.13% of the 8 trillion COVID response has been allocated to the most vulnerable. My friends, it is not 1%. It is not even 0.5%. Just 0.13%. How can we justify this? We cannot afford to lose an entire generation. We cannot afford to turn the clock back on the progress made on eradication of child labor and on ensuring education, health care, and safety for all children. This grave fact calls for a fair share for most marginalized children and their families. The call for fair share is a call for justice. The 20% marginalized children and their families must receive 20% of the global COVID response aid. This is the absolute least that we can do. The true yardstick, my dear friends, of our COVID response would be 9-year-old Lynette from Kenya, who remains hungry due to school closure without school feeding. 12-year-old Jamilo in India, a child laborer who died on the road. And 16-year-old Hassan, a refugee child in Greece. I ask you, whose children are they? They are my children. They are your children. They are all our children. My dear brothers and sisters, we are here today to mitigate this crisis of morality. We are here today to galvanize political will and action towards our children. We are here to mobilize citizens, particularly you, to hold governments accountable. And we are here to globalize compassion. It has never happened in the past history that over 40 Nobel laureates and world leaders and thousands of the young people come together to raise their voice collectively for the most marginalized children of the world. We do not have a choice but to act, and to act now for our children, their rights, their freedom, their future, their fair share. I once again welcome you to this summit and call upon you to be the champions for the fair share for children. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Next, I would like to welcome the Prime Minister of Sweden, His Excellency Stefan Löfven.
Young leaders, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for inviting me to this important event. I would especially like to thank two friends, Nobel Peace Prize laureate Kailash Satyarthi and President of Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, Kerry Kennedy. Around this time last year, we celebrated the 30th anniversary of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. This year, we are unfortunately unable to meet and discuss some of the world's most urgent matters because COVID-19 has presented the entire world with unprecedented challenges. Many children and young people across the world have had to adapt their lives. Their schools have closed, their activities have been cancelled, their parents may have lost their jobs, or their families have been forced to stay at home in quarantine. This pandemic has put children in a more vulnerable situation in all parts of the world, in all parts of society. Children are at increased risk of abuse, physically, psychologically, sexually, and on the internet. The worst forms of child labor includes some of the most appalling child abuse, not only endangering children's health, but also their lives. I therefore congratulate the ILO on the universal ratification of the worst forms of child labor convention, a first for any ILO convention. And I especially congratulate the convention's promoter, Kailash Satyarthi. Thank you for your tireless work and determination. Every child must feel safe in the knowledge that we will not give up on their future, their safety, and their rights. And this responsibility is ours as leaders, as decision makers, and as adults. We, must drive our policies to ensure that respecting, protecting and promoting the rights of the child is at the very core of our decision-making. We must put human rights, democracy and the rule of law at the core of our COVID-19 response. And we must create an approach that is based on child rights. And this is in line with the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And finally, we must acknowledge the critical role of children and young people in decision-making. Their voices are crucial to achieving a sustainable, peaceful and democratic future. I am a firm believer in international cooperation. I want to see an increase in our coordinated efforts so that we can ensure a fair, sustainable and democratic recovery from this pandemic. We are more likely to succeed if we cooperate with each other. I therefore welcome international initiatives such as this meeting and your commitment to protecting the world's most marginalized and vulnerable children. We have made progress, yes, but we are far from done. So let us continue our efforts. Thank you so much.
Also joining us is former President of Ireland and the current Chair of the Elders, Her Excellency Mary Robinson.
Thank you very much, children who are listening, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, how nice it is to be introduced to this summit by a child's voice. So I am very pleased that this has emphasized that children also have a voice, as the Convention on the Rights of the Child made it clear. They have rights and they also can voice and should voice those rights. This is an incredibly important summit because of what COVID-19 has done. It has exacerbated all the inequalities, the inequality of poverty, the inequality of race, of gender, but also the inequalities in relation to children, especially marginalized children. I heard the pain in Kailash's voice, and he called it a crisis of morality. I also call it a crisis of justice, because we have to reach out to those who are most marginalized. I was happy to join with over 80 other laureates and leaders in the joint statement that we issued in May, that 20% of COVID-19 funding should be for the relief of the 20% who are most marginalized, the most marginalized children and their families, for the reasons that have been set out. And I think we need to link COVID-19 with the other looming crisis, which is climate change, the climate crisis, because the climate crisis has created the conditions for a pandemic. And we have to remember that, and for future pandemics. So we really need to change very dramatically how we are going to go forward. And I think COVID is helping us with important lessons. And I just wanted to reference 4 of those lessons because I think they are relevant to a fair share for children. The first lesson is that collective behavior actually works and matters. It's what's protecting us from the virus at the moment because we don't have a vaccine. It's our compliance with lockdown and with social distancing, etc. Secondly, government matters. And we see, in fact, women-led governments doing very well in taking tough action and listening to the science and bringing their people with them. And the third thing is that science matters. And I hope as we listen now to the health experts, we'll begin to listen more to climate scientists on the climate crisis. And fourthly, compassion matters. And that's the one that I want to particularly emphasize in the context of this summit. Because we're now all affected by COVID, not equally at all, and Kailash and others have brought this out, it does exacerbate the inequalities, but we're all affected. It has opened us a bit to the empathy we need to really recognize who are the more marginalized, who are the children who are already suffering and who are suffering so much more. And therefore, I think there are really good lessons as well as the destructive elements of COVID that we can learn. And I appreciate very much that we must work all the harder because of how it has affected us. Thank you very much.
I am now happy to welcome 1989's Nobel Peace Laureate, His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
The future is in our hand. So now generation, children, they are the main human being who taking care about the world. Taking care of the world is actually taking care of ourselves. If global warming or these also the situation really affect our life. So now I feel the 20th century, 21st century, 20th century, a lot of violence. Now 21st century, comparatively less. So now everywhere, people, you see, very fond to use the word peace, world peace. In previous century, not much voice that. So now our children, you are the key generation, you see, who create our future, truly peaceful world, and particularly now the social system. Sometimes you see rich always you see remain higher, and the poor people remain poor. Now in that respect, I am socialist. I always is talking about the well-being of majority. There's a poor people. So the children, please pay more attention about the reduce this gap, rich and poor. That's my main concern, and I want to share with you, whether you call you yourself as a socialist or not. So we have to think humanity. Then particularly those poor people, they really need, you see, help. So poor people, you see, just faith, God, Allah, Buddha. You see, not sufficient. We have to make effort. You see, how to reduce this gap, rich and poor, and the people, younger generation. Now, please keep in your mind, we must reduce this rich and poor, this gap.
Our next speaker is United Nations Special Envoy for Global Education and former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Mr. Gordon Brown.
Many people, I'm delighted that Nobel laureates are coming together. Nobel laureates who are so distinguished in their own fields of expertise, coming together to fight for the cause of children and young people. And I'm delighted also that it's under the auspices of Kailash, who has done so much, leading the global march against child labour and rescuing so many children from trafficking, to put the cause of children and young people at the top of not just India's agenda, but every nation's agenda. And now we have a challenge. 30 million children will not return to school after COVID. Some will be in child labour, some will be subjected to child marriage, some to child trafficking. And that means that there will be more than 300 million children not going to school, vulnerable, often in the streets, often the victims of trafficking and other crimes. So it's absolutely vital that we recognise that education is the best route out of child trafficking, child labour and child marriage. That we recognise too that education gives young people hope about the future. You know, hope dies when a convoy of food can't get through to a besieged town. It dies when a refugee ship is lost at sea and capsizes. It dies also when a hospital has not the medical equipment to deal with the COVID disease and yet patients suffering from it. But hope can die too when young people cannot prepare and plan or even dream about the future ahead of them because they lack the ability, the capacity to get an education in their own right. And that's why the cause of education is so important. There are 1 billion children who can't read and write before the age of 11, and at the age of 11. They will leave school without qualifications and cannot easily get a job that pays the sort of wages that they need to ease the family out of poverty. So fighting for education is fighting for children and young people. This is a cause that everyone is able to support. Every parent, every teacher, every campaigner for civil rights, every campaigner for children and young people. I wish the conference well.
It gives me great pleasure to introduce the Executive Director of UNICEF, Ms. Henrietta Fore.
His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of UNICEF, welcome everyone to this important summit. A summit about the future, a summit about children. We need ideas, we need leadership, and we need urgent solutions to make this panel's vision of a fair share for children a reality. Because even before the pandemic hit, the world was dramatically off track in meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. COVID-19 has accelerated this. It is a child's rights crisis. Poverty is increasing, inequality is growing, and the pandemic has exposed the fault lines of development in every country that continue to separate the haves and the have-nots. Between those who have ready access to health care, water, sanitation, nutrition, and economic protections, and those who do not. Health systems are stretched to the limit. Families who rely on local, community-based care who are not getting the support they need because of the lockdowns and service disruptions. Hunger and malnutrition is on the rise. So is violence. Lockdowns are putting children at risk of child labor and child marriage. And of course, the pandemic has thrown over 1 billion children out of school. But the pandemic is also showing us what we can do when we join forces to support children, like our work to strengthen local health systems and keep vital services like immunization campaigns up and running, like using technology and online tools to keep children learning, like our GIGA initiative to connect every community, every school, and every child to the internet, like scaling up social protections like cash transfers to help families make ends meet, like working with vital partners such as the private sector to develop innovative solutions, and faith-based organizations who are supporting communities through this challenging time, and like the continued generosity of donors to help countries not only recover, but reimagine all of the systems that communities need, including water, sanitation, hygiene, which are so critical to fighting COVID-19. Together, we must use this moment as an opportunity to stand behind communities that are struggling to build a better future for countries, for economies, and for children. And the discussion must start now. With their expertise and influence, the visionary leaders gathering at this conference can help develop and deploy new solutions that can push the world through this challenging moment in time. 30 years ago, UNICEF organized the World Summit for Children. Leaders gathered to reaffirm their commitment to supporting children and to recognize that children hold the future in their hands. But today, their futures are in ours. History is calling on us once again. Let's stand with children as they face COVID-19, and let's support them and their communities as they respond, recover, and reimagine the future. Thank you, and have a great meeting.
Now please, welcome Ms. Alana Mangueira, a youth activist and steering committee member of the 100 Million campaign in Brazil.
ano passado, quando estivemos reunidos, já tínhamos imensos desafios para promover a proteção de crianças e adolescentes, especialmente contra o trabalho infantil, mas não imaginávamos que o pior estava por vir. A pandemia escancarou todas as fragilidades dos países e as dificuldades para lidar com os problemas estruturais. Há projeções de que a economia da América Latina e do Caribe volte a patamares de 2010. O Brasil já está em recessão. Na prática, nossa economia regrediu ao patamar de 2009. O aumento do desemprego já está impactando diretamente a renda familiar, aumentando também os níveis de pobreza e pobreza extrema. Os estudos indicam que a tendência é de que este cenário piore no pós-pandemia, o que certamente reduzirá a possibilidade das famílias de ter recursos suficientes para atender às necessidades básicas e aumentará as desigualdades sociais e educacionais que já eram preocupantes. Nesse contexto, crianças e adolescentes são os mais vulneráveis. Muitas crianças e adolescentes da região não estão com seu direito à educação garantido, porque não têm acesso à internet, não têm computadores, não têm condições necessárias para continuar estudando em meio à pandemia e às soluções propostas pelos governos. O trabalho infantil na região, que vinha se reduzindo, mesmo que lentamente, agora aumenta. Nossos desafios, enquanto defensores dos direitos humanos de crianças e adolescentes, são gigantescos e tornam ainda mais difícil o alcance da meta 8.7 dos Objetivos do Desenvolvimento Sustentável de eliminação de todas as formas do trabalho infantil até 2025. É possível, nesse contexto, vencermos este desafio? É possível, desde que haja vontade política e trabalho em rede para a garantia da proteção de milhares de crianças e adolescentes contra o trabalho infantil e contra tantas outras violações de direitos humanos. Dentre os caminhos possíveis, é fundamental que os países e os tomadores de decisões defendam e pressionem por mais investimento na educação pública. Defenda a implementação de políticas públicas de renda básica para as famílias, de proteção social, saúde e educação para todos, e em que todos os programas, ações e políticas públicas, a proteção integral de crianças e adolescentes seja um princípio respeitado. É importante destacar que ano que vem é o Ano Internacional para a Eliminação do Trabalho Infantil. Precisamos de ações concretas e imediatas de todos vocês que participam deste encontro, tanto no que se refere ao combate ao trabalho infantil, quanto à defesa do direito à educação para todas as crianças e adolescentes. Deixo claro também que nós, jovens, temos um papel fundamental, especialmente na ação coletiva, para combater os discursos que naturalizam o trabalho infantil, pois sabemos que em tempos de recessão, essas narrativas se fortalecem. Agora, mais do que nunca, precisamos estar unidos para que tenhamos uma sociedade mais justa e igualitária.
Our next speaker is Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus.
Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, children and adolescents are among some of the most affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. In many countries, essential health services and immunization programs have been partially or completely suspended, putting millions at risk and resulting in an increase in child mortality and morbidity. The pandemic also threatens the food security and nutrition of millions of children around the world. Due to school closures, some 368 million school children have missed out on school meals. The increased hunger resulting from the pandemic shocks could lead to the deaths of an estimated 10,000 children every month. So, what can we do about it? Firstly, availability and access to essential services must be ensured, including for immunization, nutrition, sexual and reproductive health, breastfeeding, and mental health and psychosocial support. Second, countries and communities that chose to reopen schools must do so by following sound guidance on how to prevent the potential spread of COVID-19. while avoiding stigmatizing those who may have been exposed to the virus. Third, countries must make every effort to ensure that children remain safe from abuse and maltreatment. We cannot continue to fail our young global citizens. The post-COVID recovery must have our children as the central focus. They're our most vital resource. I thank you.
Joining us next is former child laborer and current child rights activist, Mr. Kinsu Kumar.
Namaste. My name is Kinsu Kumar and I'm from India. After completing my education, today I work for the upholding the rights of children to help them to become the leaders of tomorrow. As we all know that today the whole world is not just facing a health pandemic but a global crisis that has questioned the existence of the entire human race, especially the children. It shatters me to know that instead of being free, safe, educated and healthy, children are today having to face the burden of the pandemic. Instead of being priority, the children are left behind with their protection, health, education sidelined. As I have struggled day in day to day with draw children from labor to get them to school, my inner morality is crushed by your sloppy response to the most marginalized children in the pandemic. Millions of the children are out of school today, exposed to extreme forms of exploitation, but all you have done so far is to stay in the silos of your nation states and devise economic policies including children. Who should be blamed for their suffering today? Should we blame the government that has been deprioritizing the needs of children, or should we blame the business that are covering loses the cost of childhood, or the society at large that does not have enough compassion within them to protect every child like it's their own child? I'm not asking this question only because I'm an advocate for child rights, but because I have personally known what it's like to be exploited as a child. I remember I was only 6 years old when I was working as a car cleaner to support my family. I did not have a choice then. Whenever I would look at other children going to school, I would always think of myself, is it fair for me not to have a choice? Anyhow, I continued to do that for the time until my father connected me with the Bal Ashram, a rehabilitation center for the rescued children who are freed from the bondage and trafficking and bonded labors. And with their support and under the guidance of Mata, Srimati Sumedha Kailash and Bhai Sahib ji, Nobel laureate Sri Kailash Satyarthi ji, I could reach where I have reached today. This was my story. As for all of you, I feel that you have done a great deal of injustice to all the children of the world who are now not going to grow up to become like me. You have killed your compassion and morality. But this is ever going to change. Today I am angry and I ask, for how long are the government going to stay complacent? How many more children have to be enslaved, trafficked and pushed into the labor for you to stand up and take action? How many more girls have to be sexually abused or raped? How many more childhood have to be lost for you to take cognizance of their existence and prioritize them? I work at the best of my potential to ensure that no other child under my watch goes unprotected and uneducated at the place where I work. But are you all still working at the best of your potential in this time of crisis, when our children need you the most? It appears like my last 15 years of hard work is going to wane because of your complaints, ignorance and lack of empathy for the children. I question the government and their lack of accountability for children. I question their morality. I question the death of morality in all of you. And I question your political will that value economy much more than the lives of children. Thank you.
And to close our opening session, please welcome 2011 Nobel Peace Laureate, Lima Bowe.
Hello everyone. It is with great pleasure that I join you all at this third annual Laureates and Leaders Summit for Children. Our world is in a dire situation right now. The COVID-19 pandemic, the persistent wars in different parts of our world, child labor continues to happen, child slavery is still a menace. We, as leaders and laureates, need to continuously raise our voices to end the ugly practice that takes away the life, livelihood, and future of our children. I would like to congratulate my brother Kailash, not just for the Laureates and Leaders Summit for Children, but for his persistence, perseverance, and tenacity in fighting this ugly situation in our world. As we come together for the next 2 days, it is my hope and prayer that we can find actions to bring our world closer to ending child labor and child slavery. Happy deliberations. I'm sad that we're not all in the same place to do this together. But may the struggle and the work that we do continue for our collective humanity. Thank you and God bless us all.
And now, a special music performance by Mr. Rocky Dawone, a Ghanaian reggae artist.
Rock your soul, baby. You know one day you're gonna be a star. Baby, you know all I wanna do is rock your soul. Some may claim I'm just a ghetto superstar. Baby, you know all I wanna do is rock your soul. Together we will build a community with love and harmony, away from the pettiness of jealousy. Love will lead us everywhere, but one day all will fade away. We do that right, we should be okay. Baby, you know one day you're gonna be a star. Baby, you know all I wanna do is rock your soul. They'll still claim I'm a superstar. Baby, you know all I wanna do is rock your soul. For time will reveal heavy hidden character. In the end, none of that will matter. Following the words of the Holy Master. When we are true, girl, breaks us through, girl. It takes two, girl. Me and you, yeah. Baby, you know one day you're gonna be a star. Baby, you know all I wanna do is rock your soul. They'll still claim I'm a superstar. Baby, you know all I wanna do is rock your soul. I wanna rock, I wanna rock your soul. I wanna rock, so your soul.
Our fast thematic panel on the child hunger crisis is just about to begin, moderated by the UNAIDS Special Ambassador and Global Spokesperson for Zero Discrimination, Mrs. Lorena Castillo Garcia.
Good morning to you all. Namaste. Buenos dias. Bonjour. Well, what a way to start this amazing summit, our third summit. A big hug and salutations to all my brothers and sisters, all the laureates and leaders and humanitarians all over the world. We are here to talk about this amazing panel about food insecurity during COVID-19, ending child hunger and stopping the virus for good. We would like to talk a little bit about what we've been getting so much information from all over the world, and we have an amazing panel today. Even before COVID-19, more than 690 million people were affected by hunger, up by 10 million people from the previous year, demonstrating a constant upward trend over the last 5 years, with 60 million people affected by hunger since 2014. COVID-19 has increased food insecurity around the world, particularly among already vulnerable populations. However, despite the pre-existing threats, including climate change, conflict, disasters, and the locust invasion in East Africa, this is not due to a global food shortage. The pandemic has impacted both the food supply chain and people's ability to purchase food. Malnutrition has disastrous effects, particularly on children, with undernutrition responsible for almost half of all deaths of children under the age of 5. As millions more children and their families enter poverty or extreme poverty as a result of the pandemic, undernutrition is set to rise steeply. In this session, we will discuss how strained health and social protection systems and fractured responses by countries are causing a rise in child hunger. I want to invite right now and present Her Excellency Sigrid Kaag. She's the Minister of Foreign Trade and Development Cooperation, with a message from the Netherlands. Good day.
Your Excellencies, distinguished laureates, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to be here today to speak a few words on this most important topic. First, let me say that I support your efforts to ensure that COVID relief funds have adequate attention for the most marginalized, with a special focus on vulnerable children and young people. Because if there's one group that's at risk in the current epidemic, it is children and youth. Maybe not in medical terms, but in all other terms that matter. They are the ones being pulled out of schools and put to work. They are the ones who have to deal with all the long-term effects of this crisis. They are the ones with a future to lose or to win. The COVID crisis threatens to put a generation of children out of school and into child labor, often in the worst conditions. This is unacceptable. The Netherlands has a long record of fighting child labor and engaging for better working conditions. COVID-19 has increased the urgency of this issue, and our collective response to the crisis requires our efforts to be accelerated. We need to make global value chains more shock-proof, future-proof, and of course sustainable, as well as engage in creating a more circular economy. For this, we need living wages and income, strict enforcement of all prohibitions, and improved access to education, a fundamental human right. This is our collective duty as governments, non-governmental organizations, and of course the private sector. The Netherlands prioritizes youth in its development agenda through a dedicated strategy, Youth at Heart. We have increased our investments in education and youth programs, and we will continue to stress the importance of youth participation in decision-making, and I call on all others to do the same. I hope that this great assembly of world leaders and Nobel laureates, through this heartfelt moral leadership, calls on the world to also put youth at heart, both in the current crisis and with a view to the future to build back better. Thank you.
And thank you, Madame Sigrid. Yes, we have to put the youth at heart. They come first. Now I want to introduce to you the panel of leaders that we have for these amazing thematic panel. We have Mr. Ayodi. Are you there? Hello, Ayodi.
Yes, hello.
He's coming from Nigeria.
Yes.
We also have Madame Tawakul. Tawakul. Carmen, Nobel Prize laureate. We also have Dr. Máximo Torero, Chief Economist and Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Buenos días, señor Máximo.
Buenos días.
We also have Miss Andrea Valle. She's a youth activist and national leader for 100 Millions of Peru. Perú está aquí. Buenos días.
Buenos días.
And Professor Mohamed Janus. He is the 2006 Nobel Prize laureate. We're all here. Good morning to you all. Thank you so much for being in this panel. I'm coming from you live from Panama, so hello all over the world to all of you. Okay, we're going to start with Mr. Ayodi from the Esomchi Foundation in Nigeria. Good morning.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. How are you? Good morning.
Morning. Okay, can I go on?
Yes, we're ready for you.
Okay, thank you. It's my pleasure joining the global leaders and the global activists and then the Nobel laureate across the world. I'm going to be addressing malnutrition and then hidden hunger through biofortified foods. Nigeria has the second highest number of children affected by malnutrition globally, with more than 2.5 million children suffering from severe acute malnutrition. Also, Nigeria has the second highest burden of stunted growth globally, with 32% prevalent rate. And in Africa, there is a prevalence of undernutrition, and that is to a degree of 21%. This is disastrous. Our children should not be victims of inadequacy or negligence. And what do we have to do? According to World Health Organization, provision of vitamin A-rich foods, provides a platform to reduce the total number of deaths as per our children. And so this is an example of such kind of food that we promote as a foundation. This is orange-fleshed sweet potato. This potato is rich in beta-carotene, and so it is easier for the body to convert them to vitamin A. And just 100 grams of this potato provide the daily vitamin A needed for the child. And also cultivating this potato in 500 meters square of land provide the daily vitamin A needed for a family of 5. But unfortunately, these potatoes are beyond the reach of our children. And that is why we are asking that humanitarian responses should be localized. We are asking that local NGOs, grassroots NGOs should be supported. We are asking that it is a time for all resources to be put together to ensure that hunger does not become deadlier than COVID-19. This is what we are asking for, that foods like this should be included in the school feeding program. This is what we are asking for. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is why we're here. We are here sharing all these experiences that we can make and use in our different countries. Amazing, thank you. Now we are going to present Her Excellency Gracia Machel. She's a co-founder of the Elders and the First Education Minister of Mozambique. It is a high honor to have you here today. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. And hello to you all. I greet you from my home country of Mozambique, where I am most pleased to join you today and add to the many voices convening here virtually, voices of global leaders and Nobel laureates, to shine a global spotlight on ending child hunger. We are gathered now amid the uncertain season of COVID, where more than 200 million children are already out of school and facing the horror of rising hunger levels. Globally, a child dies every 3 seconds due to hunger, which is equivalent to 10,000 children every day. I speak to you from a continent where hunger leaves no country untouched. According to the 2019 Africa Child Policy Forum report on child hunger in Africa, about 59 million children are stunted, and hunger contributes to approximately 45% of child mortality. These statistics shed light on the embarrassing magnitude and severity of child hunger. But this is not a stain on the African conscience alone. It is a signal of the collective failure of our times. Alarm bells are ringing from experts across the globe. Save the Children warns us that an estimated 67,000 children are in jeopardy of dying from extreme hunger across sub-Saharan Africa before the end of this year. With food increasingly scarce, young children are growing with the risk of severe malnutrition. Prior to the pandemic, more than 26 million children across Eastern and Southern Africa alone were stunted. In West Africa and Central Africa, severe acute malnutrition is expected to increase by 20% this year alone. The impact of school closures has been particularly vicious. Millions of children who get their only daily meal at school are now going hungry. It is clear we are at a dire crossroads. No child should suffer the indignity of hunger while there is enough food on this planet to feed us all. As Madiba has once told us, I quote, "There can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children," unquote. We have an opportunity now to fix a system that was already broken for millions of children. COVID is an opportunity to redesign how we provide for our most precious assets, our children. Let me now offer a few suggestions of what we can consider. One, only a handful of countries globally have food assistance programs in place with the social and income protection programs which will enable families to purchase food. This support needs to be universal. Second, let's bring proven solutions to scale so that no child is left behind or hungry anywhere in the globe. I commend the World Food Programme and UNICEF, who are working with the governments to support children now out of school and not receiving school meals, which are often the only reliable daily intake children can expect to receive. They are providing children in nearly 70 countries with take-home rations, vouchers, or cash transfers as an alternative. This effort needs to be expanded to beyond 70 countries. 3, let's think creatively on how to ease the burden of feeding families during this time and beyond. So emergency fiscal stimulus measures need to touch on food insecurity and hunger. We need social and income protection benefits to enable families to purchase food. For example, let's consider introducing e-vouchers to help families whose children normally benefit from free or discounted meals at school while schools are closed. 4, the provision of food is a basic obligation of the state. As COVID reconstruction efforts unfold, governments need to establish structures and institutions close to the heart of the highest decision-making levels. These structures and systems will provide much-needed political visibility to food and nutrition and help streamline decision-making processes that are necessary to implement national policies and programs. 5, last but not least, support must be provided to civil society organizations doing work where the need is the greatest. They are civil society organizations who are responding to the food crisis by providing food or cash to vulnerable families, ensuring access to safe and clean water, and by continuing health and nutrition services in a COVID-safe way. Much more support and investment are needed to both international and local grassroots NGOs doing this critical work. Now, COVID is a challenging time, yes, but we must rise to this challenge and come to the table as a global family to ensure that no one of our children anywhere on this planet goes to bed hungry. It is in our power to meet these needs of our younger generations. Let us not fail them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Her Excellency Michelle. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge. And I absolutely agree. Let's all get together and do not leave no one behind, especially our children. Let's not let any children go to bed with hunger. Thank you so much. Now I want to present to you Dr. Máximo Torero. He's the Chief Economist, Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Buenos días, Dr. Máximo.
Yes, and good morning to everybody, and good morning to all you excellencies. So COVID-19 crisis is undermining our efforts to achieve zero hunger. We have estimated as FAO that the number of undernourished could increase in up to 132 million people. This means that by 2030 will be more than 900 million people undernourished, far from the SDG 2 that we want to achieve. The world food systems are under threat as never before in recent times, and this is impacting not only food trade, food supply chains and markets, but also people's livelihoods and nutrition. Our major problem today is a problem of food access because of the economic recession we are facing. As FAO and with our partners, we are striving to assess the impact of the pandemic on food security and lives of the most vulnerable, and to offer responses and mitigation solutions. Safeguarding children's food security, protecting and securing a better future for them is of utmost importance for FAO. With the outbreak, child education has been affected with 1.6 billion students out of school. Some children might never go back to school as a result. This is really something that we cannot accept. Child nutrition has been very negatively impacted with more than 370 million children who could no longer rely on school meals during the school closure. 6.7 million children under 5 could suffer from wasting this year due to the COVID-19. Yet, another detrimental effect of the crisis is affecting children whose families depend on agriculture for their livelihoods. I am talking about child labor. It has been estimated that even only for this year, we will have additional 745,000 children pushed into child labor in all sectors, including agricultural production. This is a hard blow, also in view of the next year's Food System Summit and International Year of the Elimination of Child Labor. Household extreme poverty is increasing from 89 to 117 more people moving into extreme poverty. And this, of course, will be deeper for small producers in rural areas, leading to this intolerable paradox of small-scale farmers being among the most at risk of food insecurity. And the paradox doesn't end there. There has been a severe labor shortage in agriculture because of the restriction of movement. The testimonials from many parts of the world reported that these conditions have been powerful drivers for child labor. Children are used to compensate income loss and the lack of manpower in food and agriculture production. These conditions existed before the COVID-19 pandemic, but have been fearfully worsened. Agriculture is the largest employer of children, with about 110 million boys and girls working too many hours, too young, in harmful working conditions. So the COVID-19 is also turning the clock back on progress made on child labor in some sectors, forcing us to work on new and more certainly worse figures. This summit comes at a crucial time. At FAO, we recognize the urgent need to implement both immediate and long-term food security and agricultural responses that systematically address the root causes of child labor. We have to take the COVID-19 as an opportunity to challenge and to change these root causes. We have run online consultations through FAO Food Security and Nutrition Forum on the role of agricultural policies to address child labor, to collect, identify, and offer solutions. Now we must implement, we must act quickly, we must do more and better for children. A global response to live up to the expectations of the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor in 2021 is really needed. A transformative and large-scale change leading to sustainable food systems, not rely on the strenuous work of children and offering dignified livelihoods is urgent. We need to target the most vulnerable children. We need to have information of where they are so that we can help them. And we need to assure that all these children that are not going to school today will come back to school. And that's where we need to put our investment. We cannot wait on that, and we need to be ready, enforcing and putting as more communication we can to convince parents that it's crucial that children go back to the schools so that they can continue the process of education, which is a way in which they will reduce the inequality of the world we have today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maximo. And I have a question for you. You've been working with all our Latin countries for many, many years, and you know what are our troubles and what do we not do very well. What would be your message to all our leaders in the different Latin American countries to get to all this vulnerable population quickly?
So the first thing we need to do, because we know the vulnerable population before COVID-19, but what we need to do now is quickly identify where the new hotspots of food insecurity are and where are the most vulnerable populations, especially in child labor. That's central, and that's something that we are doing, and that's something that we need to continue to be able to do. Why? Because our countries will have very limited resources to be able to tackle and to be able to implement the emergency measures that we need to put in place. And those short-term measures are essentially trying to target and expand social protection programs that could safeguard livelihoods. And we have to promote those social protection programs as fast as possible to assure that these young children and people which are extremely vulnerable will be properly targeted. But that's not enough. We need also to put in place measures that will take this as an opportunity to change, as I mentioned before, the root causes of child labor in agriculture. And that requires especially putting an emphasis to bring back kids to school. We need to do that. If we keep as we are going today, kids won't go back to school because parents already, again, are starting to understand that they can get some revenues from the work of kids. And that needs to be changed immediately. We need to reduce inequalities, we need to reduce gender inequalities, and we need to create a significant campaign of information so that kids can go back to school when, of course, it's possible and when, of course, it's healthy to do. We also need to tailor food security and poverty reduction strategies to reduce economic vulnerabilities of families resorting to child labor. We can increase resilience of smallholders, and by doing that, we can allow them to be able to come back. One of the major problems that smallholders are facing today is liquidity. They don't have access to resources because they don't have access to the financial system. And that's where we need to give them opportunities so that they are more resilient, and therefore they will have the incentives to be able to let kids move back to the activities that they have to do at school. And we also need to bring labor-saving practices and technologies. Those will be extremely helpful. We are moving into a world, because of COVID-19, of automatization. And we can make the use of digital technologies today to be able to make labor-saving activities that will allow these kids to go back to school. But again, it's extremely important that we help increasing resilience. And the only way we can increase resilience is by reducing inequalities. And we know inequalities are huge in the region, in Latin America, in Africa, and in Asia. And that's the big change that we have to tackle. And reducing inequalities means to do a significant transformation, means to give assets to people, access to assets, means to bring good infrastructure to people so that they can make a difference. We know building infrastructure can help to reduce inequalities. And what more than the opportunity we have today of use the public work programs that are being developed by countries to try to reactivate the economies, to link them to the agricultural activities, so that that infrastructure that is built also brings information technology, which we know will have an impact, but also give them access to markets so that they can sell their produce. And that will allow them, of course, to increase their revenues and to allow them to be able to release their kids to go back to school. So there are several measures that we have to put in place. But the most important right now for me can be defined in three elements: target the poorest with social programs, safety net programs, and develop intelligent systems of public works that will allow to reduce the enormous inequalities we have today. We cannot do the same that we have done in the past. We have to build and reconstruct better, and that means reducing inequalities for the most vulnerable so that the children can have access to schools and the children are not necessarily staying in child labor as what we are observing today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Dr. Maximo. You have all the experience, and this is why we are here. So you can listen to all these personalities all over the world that have the experience, and so we can all in our different countries be humble enough and put politics on a side and always work as one, because the answers are already there, doctor. We just have to make them better and work together. Thank you so much. Now I want to introduce to you Ms. Andrea Valle. She is the youth activist and national leader for 100 Millions in Peru. Andrea, buenos días.
Buenos días, Lorena. Good morning to everyone. Before the pandemic began, only in my country more than 3 million people suffered from hunger. Peru, like many other low and middle income countries, does not have a welfare state, and the few social programs that they have do not work efficiently. This implies that millions of people live without unemployment insurance, live without health insurance, and live without safe access to food, which leaves them even more vulnerable to the serious economic consequences that a disaster like the current pandemic brings. For this reason, in the current context of crisis, mainly people living in poverty and extreme poverty have been left without economic resources to access food, which is not ensured by states either, pushing millions of families towards food insecurity. Children are a group of special risk, since incorrect feeding in childhood limits their development, preventing them from reaching their maximum potential in the long term. The closure of educational centers due to the pandemic has meant that many children and adolescents lose access to school and university food that was a great help for the economy of millions of families. Due to this, there has been an increase in children and adolescents who currently see the practice of economic activities as a priority, in many cases dangerous jobs, to obtain at least one meal a day at home. This last factor is bringing as a consequence an increase in school and university dropouts, since by not having the basic and necessary means to survive, education has taken a back seat. It is important to recognize that food insecurity is a long-standing problem that has not been able to find a complete solution, and that unfortunately has now been exacerbated and less likely to improve. COVID-19 has shaken the foundations of an already deficient food system in various countries of the world, leaving millions of people on the brink of starvation. Due to this and the previously mentioned social and inequality problems, poor communities around the world are sending a clear, urgent, and repeated message: we will die before hunger than from COVID-19. As a young activist, I'm concerned about the serious consequences that this food insecurity has mainly on the development of children and adolescents, who are the future of the world. From 100 million campaign in Peru, we have been asking our authorities to take into account the well-being of children and adolescents in their decisions made in face of the pandemic. Likewise, we also demand that these decisions must not only provide momentary solutions to this structural problem that requires long-term policies to have results that generate a real change and impact in our future. I have been privileged with access to food, education, and health, resources that are correlated and that should be accessible to everyone. For this reason, today I have the responsibility to raise my voice for all those who didn't have these resources. We will work to make their rights respected and taken into account, and for that we ask our authorities and the youth around the world to join this cause, to join us to make the change that every child and adolescent born in a vulnerable context deserves. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Andrea. Thank you so much, Andrea. And I know that you had a meeting yesterday with different leaders and different activists of the 100 million. Do you have a message? What did you guys talk about yesterday?
Yesterday, we talked about the many contexts that the adolescents around the world are living in our different countries. And we found that there are so many similarities in our context. We have received the solutions in short-term solutions that don't change and don't make a real impact in long term. As I said before, this is a structural problem that needs a long-term decision, a long-term policy that could make a real change, not only in our present, but in the future. And for that, it is necessary that adolescents and also children join this cause to ask our authorities, to ask our decision makers to make a real change, to take into account our special situation of risk as a children, as an adolescents who are the future of the world.
Absolutely, Andrea. I'm there with you. And yes, every day we're listening to more voices saying we will die of hunger before COVID-19 if our leaders of our nations, of our governments don't make the right decisions that must include everyone, especially all children and our youth. Thank you so much, Andrea. Now I want to present Professor Mohamed Yunus. He's the 2006 Nobel Prize laureate. Good morning, Professor.
Good evening. How are you? And good morning to you too.
Where are you, Professor?
Delighted. I'm in Dhaka, Bangladesh.
In Bangladesh.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, you've been named one of the greatest entrepreneurs of all times by Fortune magazine. Okay. What is your experience and what worries you the most in this pandemic about malnutrition in children and youth?
Well, the pandemic came suddenly. There is no preparation for it. And it overcame the whole world in a lightning speed, where we thought there'll be some unified response to it, but that's not how it happened. Nations came to their nationalistic approaches rather than a multilateral approaches. Anyway, it's so sudden, and the only way you can protect yourself is social isolation, social distancing, and then go inside your home. Don't do any work. Everything is stopped. So that the sufferers of the entire thing is the people who lived on daily income, either by daily worker as a daily worker on a daily wage, or daily income through selling, to artisanal activity and so on. Suddenly their business gone, finish. So you have millions of people who are income earners. In a few days, their savings are over. They don't have any resources to feed themselves. So a huge number of people came into that situation immediately. So there was no mechanism how to handle them. So that became an immediate disaster issue, how to have an emergency response to those kind of things. Luckily now gradually it's relaxing. People are going back to work, trying to earn a little money. So that has relaxed a little bit, but the poverty level has shot up absolutely beyond our imagination that they happened. We were celebrating that the poverty has been reduced over years now. This is a very positive thing. But one disaster, one pandemic comes, suddenly all these people who cross the border now pushed back under the border. So this is one of the things that happened. So this is on the emergency side, that how to handle this kind of emergency situation. But the emergency side is only one small part of the whole problem. The problem is much bigger than that. You want me to continue on this, or you have questions?
Yes, of course. Please do. It's so interesting because
Okay.
I know that later we're going to have more thematic panels about different topics. So yes, please continue.
Yeah. So only thing I was drawing attention that this is an emergency situation, that there's people emergency relief to help people. Some sent out cash to every family and so on. Some governments did that. Some distributed food and so on. So this is one part, but we have to see it in a much bigger context. Emergency is not, it made it visible because it happened suddenly. But there's something which is permanent going on. We became tolerant to seeing it. Response level is very slow. It doesn't come out. So that's a bigger picture. In the bigger picture, we have to see since we are talking about the children part of it, the children are not isolated case. Children being unfed, we're having no nutrition, no malnutrition is common among the children. So we pay attention to the children, which is very good that we can do that. But my point is, if you focus on child alone, we will not get to the solution, because child and mother is together. So if mother is hungry, child remains hungry too, because of the same situation, and the parents particularly together. So we have to address the families who are in shortage of food, cannot have enough food for themselves. So that's a family level we have to think. But most of the program comes as a children program. Children program becomes temporary program. You keep on doing this for the time being, whatever help you can give, it happens. The moment help stops, everything comes back again. So that's not something. I'm not saying that this focus on children in many cases is important, like malnutrition, health issues, and so on. But in the long term, we have to look at the family as a complete body, so that child fits into the family situation and how to help the family to make it happen. Why childhood remains hungry? Because the parents remain hungry. Parents cannot feed themselves. Their income level is so low. So that's where the issue is, why the income level is so low. It's not the question of food. Whenever the issue of food comes, I quickly add to that, food is actually equal to income. So it's not the food, availability of food everywhere. But the question is they cannot afford, they don't have the purchasing power to go and buy the food for the family. So that's where we have to focus all our attention, how to increase the level of income for the people who are at the bottom level of the income level. So this is an issue, and corona pandemic has demonstrated the weaknesses in our society, in our economics, in a very big way. It made it visible. One of the visibility is a massive migration of informal sector people who were working on a daily income basis in cities, urban centers. When Corona came, when the social distancing became the important thing, everything stopped. Soon they ran out of their income. They couldn't pay their rent wherever they were staying, even in the little halls that exist in the slums. They couldn't pay rent for them. They couldn't feed themselves. So they're walking miles. In India, particularly, it's a very sad way that it was shown. Hundreds of thousands, millions of people walking on the highway, going hundreds of miles to go back home because there's no income here. So this is a situation that has been revealed. It's always there, but we didn't pay much attention to it. Today, because of the pandemic, it became visible, very much visible, that how people could live in a situation like that. So we have to see that why it happened, why these people could not have their survival level income in the places where they are born. Why did they have to come 1,000 miles, only hundreds of miles at least, to go to some centers where they can find some income to support their family and so on? So there's something wrong in the whole conceptualization of the economy itself. We are focusing on the urban centers and so on, forget the rural economy, forget the potential of the rural economy and so on. So this is one issue that we have to raise, how to make income possible wherever you are born, rather than you have to go hundreds of miles to find a survival level income. Beyond survival level, you can go anywhere you want, but for me, survival level income should be available where you're born. And then seeing these millions of people on the highway, this issue comes, what happened to our normal economic theory? How do they explain them? They explain them that these are the informal sector people. And informal sector people have to work hard to get into the formal sector by getting formal job. That's why the government worked hard, very, very hard to find job for them in the formal sector. Until you have been, you could enter into the formal sector, economists have no policy to focus on except saying give them some jobs, give them some food for work kind of type of program just to keep them alive. And my point is as long as you look at them as informal sector people, you'll be completely gone. You'll be coming up with the relief programs and food programs and things like that because you don't see any potential in them except for responsibility to help them to stay alive. I see them, this whole informal sector, as a micro-entrepreneurial sector. They are the one taking care of themselves. They don't go and complain to the government that give us a job. They just do whatever they can do, make a living out of that. So that micro-entrepreneurial world has to be supported with institutions, policies, actions, plans, and so on and so forth. But that doesn't exist. And I compare it with the labor sector, the formal labor sector. As a formal labor, after many, many struggles, they have come a long way. They have been recognized by the government. They have made many rights established for them. Many laws have been passed for them. They have a special labor ministry for them. I said labor is formal labor compared to informal sector or the micro-entrepreneurial sector. Micro-entrepreneurial sector in most of the countries is more than half the population of the country. In India, it's 65% of the entire population. That's a micro-entrepreneurial sector. If labor can have a ministry, I think it's very important that we have a ministry of micro-entrepreneurs so that we focus on these people. They have the potential, they do things, but they exhaust all their income by paying the loan sharks because nobody gives them the proper banking service. So they fall victims to the loan sharks. And you see loan sharks are thriving everywhere, whichever country you look at. Even the richest country in the world, you go to the United States, they call themselves payday lenders and so on and so forth. It's still the same story. There is no formal banking sector coming to those people. So I keep saying that they need a financial system to be built up so that they have the talent, they have the creativity, they have the ideas to make things happen. But the finance stops them. So that's one area that we have to pay lots of attention if you want to build up the rural economy, to build up the micro-entrepreneurial economy. And my suggestion is that to create social business micro-entrepreneurial banks so that there's a separate bank like the Grameen Bank and so on. So that people can find proper financing from institutions like that. This is very important. The whole key is generation of income. So then people are ready to make income. So this is not something new to them. But they're always stopped, always somebody take away their income, like the loan sharks take away their income. They have no other way for survival. So these institutional issues are very important. And in the context of the theoretical framework, this is also have to look at why this poverty continues. Poverty gets a big shock when a pandemic comes. It's because the way we have designed the whole economy in the world. This economy has created an enormous wealth concentration. It's a very ugly wealth concentration. It's not just simply wealth concentration as a description. It's so ugly that if you look at it, you cannot believe that we have designed an economic system which keep on doing that. We have not said a word about it in our policies, in our actions, in our thinking. 99% of the people of the world has very little access to the wealth of the world. Probably 1% of the 2% of the wealth would be owned by the 99%, whereas 1% of the population would be owning the remaining 99% of the world. So unless we address those issues, all the things, it's like a physical body. In your body, all the blood is concentrated on your fingertip. And you're talking about why the blood is not there, because it's all goes into one fingertip. So that fingertip is blown into big thing, and that never cures, never goes out. So no matter what you do, how much water you pour in a plant which is already dead, you can't keep it alive. So we have to redesign the system where wealth is not going to in a single direction. So it can be distributed along the way. So we design that program. Yes, please.
Well, Professor, I think this is the time to make those changes. COVID-19 has impacted so hard all of our nations, all over the world. And I do agree with you. I think the informal sector are the ones that have been hit the most. Exactly, because they don't have that access to that type of economy and that type of help. And nobody really knows exactly where they are. So we could start by that, by knowing exactly where are all these families in our countries and trying to find them so we can give all the answers as quick as we can. I would like to end this fabulous panel. First, thank you to all of you for being here, for sharing all your knowledge and all your wisdom. Thank you. And this is an enormous task and responsibility that I want to say that under my perspective should be taken also by local governments. We were talking about the importance of different areas and getting to them. So the national government shouldn't be taking all the responsibility on their own, because it's very difficult. You have to get help from the ONGs. Get the support. They know where the children are. They know where the families are. They know where the youth are. We have in all of our countries fabulous ONGs that have been working on the field for many years. Let's give them the tools so they can get as quickly as they can. In a survey carried by UNICEF here in Panama, 1,000 households to measure the impact of COVID-19, it was reported that nearly 77% of the homes have suffered partial or total income loss. 47 claim they have less food than normal. This percentage increases to 68% in homes with lower social economic status with an income of less than $400 a month. They also claim that the quality and quantity of their nutrition was affected by deciding to leave behind our children and younger population. We are also neglecting them of their right to nourishment, which is the basic for their substance and pillar of their growth. We are neglecting them of the right for a better future. As we've been talking, it is impossible for a government to do this on their own, staying humble, asking for help, leaving politics behind, and working for all with zero discrimination or class division, embracing collectivity, adding everyone, not subtracting. We all deserve to be cared for. We make an urgent call on the leaders of all nations to work as one, to help one another, to share information. This is key to fight for all the rights of our citizens, especially our children. Right now, we must agree on an universal vaccine, free for all. It is our moral duty. Human lives are above monetary gain and beyond any border. We must demand a safe vaccine, free to all. And ladies and gentlemen, this is how we finished our part in the panel. Thank you so much for watching. Blessings from Panama, and thank you so much.
Please enjoy the following video.
The march is a time-tested strategy. It has many benefits for building a mass movement. I always say to the young people, the history is created only by those who dare to jump inside the ring without caring or without thinking too much that whether they would succeed or they will fail.
The children you see all marching in this yatra are been victim of child labor, or there are girls also who've been sexually abused earlier. They don't want that this should happen with any other children.
लड़की लोगों को रेस्क्यू कर रहे हैं हम लोग, ऐसा गलत नहीं होना बोल के कर रहे हैं। आज हम लोग को बहुत अच्छा है और ऐसा रैली कर रहे हैं, बहुत बहुत अच्छा है।
उड़ने वाली एक ऐसी यात्रा है जो लोगों में जोश जगा देती है और इससे हमारे पूरे भारत में एक जोश पैदा हुआ है, लोगों के अंदर एक उत्साह पैदा हुआ है कि नहीं, हमारे साथ हो रहे अत्याचार को हम खत्म करेंगे।
The most powerful face is not my face. It is the face of the child who has gone through all these agonies and atrocities and slavery. When she or he speaks out about herself and demand to the people that, look, you can change the situation, then the people cannot ignore it. We use pamphlets, posters, other kind of education material, but also we use loudspeakers and we organize street theater. Those who took part, they will become the ambassadors forever.
एक दिन ऐसा आएगा हमारा भारत सुरक्षित बन जाएगा और हम बना के दिखाएंगे।
भारत यात्रा अभी हमारी खत्म नहीं हुई है, अभी तो ये शुरुआत ही है, बाकी लड़ाई तो पीछे ही है।
The second thematic panel on the topic of child labor is about to start and will be moderated by the chairperson for Global Match and the Asia Regional Program Director for Solidarity Center, Mr. Tim Ryan.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's joined us in this tremendous forum to address the child labor issue going forward, especially in the current crisis that we're facing. I wanted to thank the organizers of the program for the opportunity to be able to raise these important issues and to have a really stellar panel in this session that I would like to introduce as we can discuss the impact of COVID-19 and the economic exploitation of children and the role of global supply chains. I would like to first introduce each of the panelists very quickly. Then we'll go to each of them to be able to give a short presentation, a statement. And we want to leave sufficient time for questions, not only from participants, people who are watching around the world, but also a discussion with our participants. I'd like to introduce first Ms. Lalita Duharia. She is the president of India's National Children's Parliament and an advocate for child labor issues for many years. Of course, we have our good friend, colleague, and founder of the Kailash Children's Foundation, Kailash Satyarthi, who joins us. We're very pleased to have you on the program. Guy Ryder, the Director General of the ILO, plays such a critical, important part in the role of combating child labor. And we can see this in the context of ILO Convention 182, as earlier mentioned, the only universally ratified ILO convention that exists. We also have Ms. Smriti Zubin Irani, is currently the Union Minister for Textiles and Women and Child Development in India. She is India's youngest minister in the government and the first woman to hold office as Union Minister for Human Resource Development and as Union Minister of Textiles. We have also Mr. Martin Chungong, is the Secretary General of the Interparliamentary Union, global organization, and he is the first African and non-European to be elected to the post in the 130-year history of this organization. And then finally, we also have Mr. Roberto Sanchez, who is the Secretary General of the International Organization of Employers, who also, of course, works very, very directly and intimately with the ILO. So in the interest of time, I'd like to cut directly to ask our first panelist to give a short statement. I do want to frame this very quickly by saying that there has been tremendous progress in the fight against child labor. ILO Convention 182, the only universally ratified convention, is one of the signposts for this, and it really speaks to the change in attitude and the narrative around child labor over all these years. Young people have been a key element of this. I'd like to ask Ms. Lalita Duharia to share her experience and her observations on her own experience in this issue.
नमस्ते, मैं ललिता हूँ। मैं एक बाल अधिकार पे काम करने वाली एक युवा कार्यकर्ता हूँ। आज के हालात को देखते हुए बाल मित्र गाँव में बाल व्यापार, बाल मजदूरी, बाल विवाह और बाल शोषण मिटाने के लिए मैं और मेरे साथ के बच्चे हमारे गांव और आसपास के गांव को बाल उत्पीड़न मुक्त बनाने का काम करते हैं। कुछ साल पहले हमने बाल आश्रम के साथ मिलकर हमारे गांव को बाल मित्र गांव बनाने का प्रण किया। लोगों को घर घर जाकर समझाना व रैलियां निकालकर उन्हें बच्चों के अधिकारों के बारे में बताया। कुछ साल की कड़ी मेहनत के बाद उन लोगों की सोच में बहुत ज्यादा परिवर्तन आया।
Namaste, my name is Lalita and I am a youth activist on child rights. My friends and I work in our village Dera in Rajasthan, India to make our neighboring villages free from all forms of exploitations against children, especially child labor, child marriage and trafficking. A few years ago, we had together committed to make Dera a child-friendly village with the help of Bal Ashram founded by Sri Kailash Satyarthi. Over the last few years, my friends and I have been rallying and going door to door, spreading awareness on the importance of education and convincing people to withdraw their children who are engaged in child labor. A lot has changed since then in the village.
इसके बाद हमारे गांव में जो बच्चे बाल मजदूर थे और शिक्षा से वंचित थे, उन्हें स्कूल से जोड़ा और स्कूल की और जो गांव की जो सामान्य समस्याएं थी, उनको सरपंच को पत्र लिखकर उनका समाधान करवाया। हमारे गांव में मेरे साथ व अन्य दलित बच्चों के साथ जातिगत भेदभाव किया जाता था। मैंने ये मुद्दा बाल पंचायत में अध्यापकों के सामने उठाया और हमने हमारे अधिकार की मांग की और विजय रहे।
After that, our children's council helped admit all out-of-school children and children withdrawn from labor into schools. Since we represented all the children of our village, we raised our concerns in front of the village governing body, wrote letters to the district and even state to resolve them. In my village, other children from Dalit community, including me, were discriminated against. Dalit community is essentially the most marginalized caste group in the hierarchical social order of caste system in India. I wasn't even allowed to serve food in my school because I was considered polluted. We fought against this and we won.
कोरोना काल चल रहा है। हमने कोरोना काल में बच्चों की पढ़ाई की अन्य वैकल्पिक व्यवस्था के लिए प्रधानमंत्री और शिक्षा मंत्री को भी पत्र लिखे हैं, जिसमें हमने पंचायत स्तर पर बड़ा टीवी स्क्रीन और कक्षा 12वीं तक अनिवार्य व निःशुल्क शिक्षा की मांग की है। कोरोना काल में लोगों को कोरोना संक्रमण से बचाने के लिए उनको हमने मास्क बना के बांटे हैं और बच्चों व बड़ों को बांटे, उनको बचाव के उपाय भी बताए। जब हम खुद बच्चे होकर बड़ों का पूरे समुदाय का कोरोना में बचाव कर सकते हैं, तो क्या बड़ों का हमारे प्रति कोई जिम्मेदारी नहीं है?
The pandemic has taken all over the world today. During the COVID pandemic, we wrote letters to the Prime Minister and the Education Minister seeking support for underprivileged children who had no access to digital learning, raising the need for a big screen television in our panchayat and free and compulsory education for all till 12th standard. We also made and distributed masks to children and adults of my village and created awareness on the issue to protect them from the virus. If we as children, through our strong resolve, can think of protecting adults or the entire community from corona, do adults like you have no responsibility towards our protection in these difficult times?
मैं दलित वर्ग की एक बालिका होते हुए भी बच्चों के स्वास्थ्य व अन्य सुरक्षा के लिए जो मुझसे हो सके मैं कर रही हूँ, ताकि मेरा व मेरे साथियों का बाल मजदूरी को रोकने का प्रण नहीं टूट सके। मगर आप सरकार व कॉरपोरेट का खुद हिस्सा होते हुए भी अपने विशेषाधिकार का बच्चों के हित में उपयोग नहीं कर रहे। हम बच्चों ने करीब 400 गांवों में आज तक हजारों बच्चों को बाल मजदूरी से दूर कर उन्हें स्कूल से जोड़ा है। कोशिश की है कि मुझ जैसे पिछड़े वर्ग के बच्चे कभी बाकियों से पीछे ना रहे। मगर आज मैं जानना चाहती हूँ कि आप लोगों की नैतिकता बच्चों के लिए क्यों मर गई है? क्यों आप हमारे प्रयासों, हमारे अधिकारों और हमारे भविष्य को अंधेरे में डालना चाहते हैं?
I am a 16-year-old girl from an underprivileged community and I have been working relentlessly towards the protection of children during the pandemic so that our council's commitment towards zero tolerance against child labor is not compromised. But despite being a part of the government and the corporate sector, you all are not using your privilege and power to the advantage of the marginalized children. Spanning over 400 villages, we children have so far withdrawn thousands of children from work and enrolled them into schools. We have tried hard to mainstream children from weaker sections like me. But today I want to know from all of you, why has your morality died for us? Why do you want to put all our efforts, our rights, our futures in the dark?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lalita. Thank you very much for a very heartfelt and important presentation. You actually answered one of my questions, which is what kind of advice and what kind of suggestions do you give to young people and young workers today? And I'd like to hear more from you on that. But you've already given us some many good examples of the kind of work that the children's parliaments can do at the village level. I'd like to call on our second speaker, our wonderful host, Kailash ji, to address the program. I actually did want to also pose maybe a part of a question here, Kailash. And what are the priorities, or what can leaders outside of business and government do with regard to child labor and supply chains? It's not clear. If Kailash, can you hear me?
Sorry. Thank you very much. I personally feel extremely concerned in this situation when I read the reports that the aftermath of pandemic is going to create worst effect on the lives of millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of children in the world. Many of them fall into child labor. Many of them would be bound to leave schools. And the estimations is that an additional 1 million children may die before attaining the age of 5. But I am quite optimistic even in this situation when I see the faces of all of you, dear panelists, my dear friends, and all the panelists in other sessions of this Fair Share Summit. To answer your question, Tim, first of all, I would say that we can congratulate each other for the universal ratification of ILO Convention 182. We have made remarkable progress, but of course not up to the mark as we were expecting. We now realize that the international community and each government is responsible for eradication of the worst forms of child labor. But that sense of responsibility should be extended to a deeper sense of accountability, moral accountability as well as the political accountability, so that we can address this extraordinary situation. I would also say that, as we said before, that $8 trillion have been allocated or announced as the COVID pandemic response fund. But unfortunately, the data shows that this money is not going to the last person, the most marginalized children and their parents. So I would reiterate here that the fair share of 20% of this COVID-related fund must be spent for the most marginalized 20% children and their families. I would also add here that a lot of money has been allocated to bail out the big companies in many countries. So this is the right time to hold them accountable and make sure that no child labor, no forced labor is employed in their supply chain. And that should be the responsibility of the governments who have put a lot of money in bailing out those companies. So that is one of the things which the governments must do. This is also the responsibility of the companies to make sure that no child labor is employed in the supply chain. And for that, I have been calling for the laws at the country level as well as international law to ensure that a due diligence is made in the supply chain by those companies. I would also like to add here that the fair share requires much more support for the due diligence in supply chain, and the governments have to invest on it so that the companies are enabled to take up this responsibility. I would also call upon my friends, especially the young friends who are attending this summit, that they should take the lead. They should be the champion. And I'm happy that in many places in the world, through our 100 million for 100 million campaign, the young people, the student leaders are raising their voices and ready to fight against the menace of child labor, illiteracy, and poverty of children. So we have to build a worldwide movement. The movements are there, but we have to have a stronger movement. And I have an experience of the global march against child labor, and many of you had the same experience being the strong partners in the global march in 1998. So we have seen that how we can challenge and change the situation if we are united. So this is the right time that we have to act as a global family, as the Indian ethos say that we believe in the global family, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So we have to work together instead of being too isolated. I would also call upon that we have to be ready to make the optimal use, the maximum use, to build such a movement next year, as the UN has announced the UN year for the elimination of child labor. I have been in contact with many governments and, of course, with my friend and brother, Director General of ILO, Guy Ryder, that how we can make big impact in these difficult situations also. Dear friends, I would sum up by saying that 40 years ago, I was alone. When I gave up my career as electrical engineer, my mother was crying. My friends mocked at me. Everybody said that what nonsense you're talking about. Children are poor, they are helping the families. But I said, no, this is the denial of human rights and human dignity. This is the denial of humanity. We cannot tolerate it. Slowly, people started coming together. But now, I appeal all of you that since I am so wealthy that I have so many great friends, many of you are sitting in this panel. Beside Guy Ryder, I have Martin, who is sitting here, a great old friend, and similarly the Director General of Employers Organization, and my very dear sister, who is extremely compassionate and extremely professional and dynamic in dealing with the issues related to the exploitation of children in any form. So together, my dear friends, sisters and brothers, we are going to mitigate this crisis of morality, this crisis of childhood, this crisis of education, this crisis of freedom and dignity of all children. I call upon you to join Fair Share for Children. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kailash ji, not only for putting this in a perspective, but also for reminding us that constant effort and constant pressure and constant awareness is an incredibly important part of making this change in the world. I'd like to invite ILO Director General Guy Ryder to please address the forum. Guy?
Well, thank you very much indeed, Tim. It's a great honor to speak after Lalita and Kailash on this vitally important subject and in the company of my other friends on the panel. Let me go straight to the point, Tim. The COVID-19 pandemic has created a great deal of damage to labour markets, the world of work around the world. And one of the things that it's done, of course, is lead to an aggravation of the situation in respect of child labour. And this has been said by other panellists. We've made progress in recent years, not as much as we would like, but very significant. We've reduced child labour by 1/3 since the beginning of this century. And yet, and this is going to be for the first time since the ILO started systematically collecting statistics, COVID-19 will in all likelihood lead to an increase, an absolute increase in the numbers of child labourers in the world. And those figures are at the moment, well, 152 million, of which 73 million are in the worst forms of child labour. This despite the very welcome news of the universal ratification of Convention 182, which was really a fantastic thing. It's not difficult to understand why this is happening. We know that with the loss of jobs and livelihoods, extreme poverty is spreading around different parts of the world. People are losing their livelihoods. If one looks, for example, at the 2 billion workers in the informal economy, 1.6 billion, that's with a B, face the destruction of their livelihoods. And in these circumstances, combined with the absence of adequate social protection, the closing down of educational facilities as well, it's quite easy to see the mechanisms which are driving more and more children into child labour. But this is not a situation that we can or should regard as a fatality, something we can do nothing about. What we do now in rebuilding from COVID-19, I think will have a long-lasting effect on the future trajectory of child labour, and that's what we have to turn our attention to. Now, in this situation, the role of global supply chains is very significant. The studies we've released recently with others in the system show that between 9 and 26% of child labour, depends which region we're talking about, occurs in the setting of global supply chains. So global supply chains are very much concerned both in the occurrence of child labour and indeed in its elimination. And this is why the notion of due diligence exercised by companies in managing their supply chains is of fundamental importance. This is a live debate. We're working on it. I've heard Kailash speak of the legislating of due diligence. That is a controversial subject still in the ILO, but these are clearly matters where we have to move forward. Now, in these rather grim circumstances, we have real opportunity. As Kailash has mentioned, next year has been designated the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labour. We have in place a very important and very active global alliance, Alliance 8.7, which is working to meet the 2030 agenda targets in respect of child labour and forced labour. Even without COVID-19, Tim, we were missing those targets. We have to accelerate that effort, and I think the International Year next year is a tremendous springboard for us to bring together all of our efforts in this regard. So I'll leave it there for now and hopefully join in the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Guy. And, I think this is an important point to make about the International Labour Organization is it is the one UN agency that really actually combines and brings together government, employers, and workers, and as such has a unique opportunity to address issues like this. Next, I would like to call on our guest, Mrs. Smriti Irani from the Indian government, to give her presentation. And as Guy said, we'll be looking forward to following up on all of these presentations with some additional questions. So, Ms. Irani.
Thank you so much. I think the tone was set by Lalita's presentation today, which voiced an angst that can be shared by children across the world. But I'm here today to assuage not only her fears, but also give wing to her aspirations which are shared by children of her age across the nation. The majesty of the Indian Constitution is such that it does not allow government, or for that matter any individual or organization, corporate or otherwise, to differentiate or deter the progress of women, children or men for that matter on the basis of gender, caste, creed or their economic background. And it is under the protection of that majesty of the Indian Constitution today that I can profess that especially in the pandemic, the Government of India in collaboration with all states of our country have prioritized the needs of our children and vulnerable women. I can say here with authority that in the past 5 to 6 months, especially when the entire global community has been enveloped with the challenge called COVID-19, we have ensured under the aegis of the Government of India, free food and ration for over 800 million families, individuals across our country, up to the month of November, especially under the aegis of the ministry that I chair, the Ministry of Women and Child Development. We have ensured that there is doorstep delivery of ration for over 80 million pregnant lactating women and children between the ages of 6 months to 6 years. We have made provisions to ensure that due to the pandemic, the educational aspirations of our children are not hindered. And that is why we in the Government of India, in collaboration with all states, have ensured that free education digitally is made available between classes 1 to 12 to all children across the country. Especially the pandemic saw the leveraging of digital technology so that children can have academic aid. And we have seen on a platform called Swayam, over 92 courses offered free of charge by the Government of India and an enrollment of over 15 million students. But as Lalita said, there are areas in our country where people find that the remotest of corners are yet untouched. And those are the corners in which we have leveraged the use of community radios, over 200 stations, to ensure children, especially between classes 1 to 5, can do activity-based learning on the basis of helps from radio stations and community radios. I am today emboldened enough in the presence of Kailash Satyarthi to say that we have in the Government of India diligently worked towards protecting our children. Before the pandemic hit the global community, we in the Indian Parliament passed stringent laws to protect our children from sexual assault and specially brought in the first ever instrument for penalizing those who indulge in child pornography. As we speak, ladies and gentlemen, we in the Ministry of Women and Child Development are currently undertaking an exercise to present to Parliament the most stringent law possible on trafficking of women and children. But the governance agenda of the government was not limited to only servicing the medical needs of our nation during the pandemic. We have sanctioned for the first time in the history of our country an anti-trafficking unit across each district of our country so that women and children in our country are better protected. I must here also confess that in the past 6 years, under the direction of the Honorable Prime Minister of India, we have set up in every district of the country one-stop crisis centers which can be used by women and children, and especially those civil society leaders who want to become a link and a support mechanism between children and the government at large. I must here also bring to your notice that the Government of India, in collaboration with all states, ensured that we had 24/7 working helplines so that our children could reach to us. Additionally, the government in India, in collaboration with its administrative bodies across all states, ensured that our children who are specially housed in childcare institutions get adequate medical and other academic or support needed to protect them better in the event of the pandemic. I must here assure everyone that the Government of India is committed not only to ensure a safer, a healthier future for our children, a future where they are free of the bondage of labor, but additionally the Government of India is also committed to the global community to ensure that we walk step by step, hand in hand with the global community to ensure that the world is a safer place for our children. In that endeavor, we are hopeful of your continued support and guidance, and with that, I would rest my opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Irani. This is it's really very interesting to hear, especially about the legislation that has been introduced and passed in the Indian Parliament. And actually, that's a good segue opportunity to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Martin Chungon. He was the Secretary General of the Inter-Parliamentary Union. Mr. Chungon, look forward to your remarks here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, team. It gives me great pleasure, and it's an honor for me to share this panel with distinguished friends. I see Kailash there and Guy, and I am pleased to be part of this endeavor, which is intended to fight a noble cause, that of protecting the most vulnerable in society, children. A lot has been said about progress that has been made in protecting children's rights, but also we've heard a lot about the negative and disastrous impact of the current COVID pandemic on society, the economy, especially exacerbating inequalities in society. We have heard about the potential for COVID to derail progress that has been made. And so, first of all, I want to say that there is urgent need to correct our course, to help, as they say, build back better in order to have more resilient societies. And as I was briefed on this panel, I was asked to be concrete in what could be done. And you will allow me to refer to the constituency I know best, and that is the parliamentary constituency. I was reading the report that is being launched today, Fair Share for Children, and I saw that the recommendations, all the recommendations in that report, are within the realm of Parliament. And what I want to do today is to, again, make a clarion call to the parliamentary community to use the powers that are available to them. I'm not asking parliaments to reinvent powers. Those powers are there. And I would like just to illustrate this with 4 points. One, it is within the realm of parliaments to ratify international conventions. The point has been made about Convention 182, but I do think that we also have Convention 138 that I believe is not totally ratified. So it is up to parliaments not only to ratify, but to make sure that the provisions in these international legal frameworks are translated into national legislative frameworks. One. Secondly, I would also like to see parliaments being more robust in their budgetary functions, allocating more resources to areas that are intended to protect children's rights. And there is no paucity of areas where they can invest in terms of education, in terms of generating income, empowering women and young people, and establishing better social services. And three, I think that we shouldn't forget and minimize the role that parliaments and parliamentarians can play as advocates, as opinion leaders, raising awareness of the scourge of child labor and the fact that children should not be in the supply chain, but should be in school or should be enjoying a life at home. Lastly, I want to mention the oversight role of parliaments, and there again they have to hold government to account. It is not enough to have the legislative framework. It is also important to make sure that that legislative framework is being enforced and that resources are being allocated there. And so let me conclude at this stage and say that the role of the IPU is to mobilize these parliaments around the world to play their role more effectively. And I'm pleased that we are partnering with the International Labour Organization, but also with Kailash, my good friend, in mobilizing parliaments in support of children's rights. We want to continue to develop tools that are available to the parliamentary community. And the message is that we should together mobilize parliaments to keep children's rights alive on the radar screens of the parliamentary community around the world. We look forward to working with the various partners that I've referred to, and UNICEF as well as others, in order to continue to mobilize parliaments. It is now we need parliamentary action more than ever before. Time is of the essence, and we cannot afford to be complacent. So I think that we should mobilize that particular segment of society, the parliamentary community, in support of children's rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Changon. This is it's an important aspect of government. Administrations are responsible for carrying out education and the structure of services and so on, but getting those services and representing people's interest and voice, Parliament is a huge aspect of that. So I really appreciate the commitment of the IPU to work on this issue. Lastly, I'd like to call on our colleague, Mr. Roberto Sanchez, who is the Secretary General of the International Organization of Employers, also working closely with the ILO. Mr. Sanchez.
Thank you very much for this invitation. I feel honored to participate in this panel with such distinguished panelists, but beyond all, what we want is to achieve some action, effective action, and we have been repeating that already since the pandemic started. The pandemic, and you have already said that, but I think it's important that I highlight from a private sector perspective, has resulted in many economies having dramatic, we use the word devastating economic and social consequences. And believe me, this affect, and you know, this affect business continuity, this affect enormously, especially small and medium companies. But we are very much aware that the most vulnerable people are those who are on the margins of societies and economies. And the losses in household incomes exposed children and also exposed families that will not be able to survive, as simple as that. And more children, and we just have heard Guy with a worrying figure that more children could be forced into exploitative and hazardous jobs. There is a real danger that all the progress, perhaps not so to the level of expectation that we have, and the progress that we have made in our fight against child labor in the last decade might be lost. But we cannot allow ourselves to go back. Of course, there are some encouraging signs. We have been working in the ILO, and believe me, the universal ratification of Convention 182 is not a minor thing. It's a historic moment. And it's really important and critical because this commitment has important legal consequences. Of course, it's not about legal consequences, it's about implementations which are very much missing despite all the progress. And that's where we need to really do much better. We are all talking about sustainable solutions, sustainability. This sustainability means that we did something wrong. And what we did wrong, perhaps, is to not address comprehensively the complexity of the challenge that we have before us. We need much more ambition to address the root causes, to address poverty, to address informality. I mean, we keep saying 60% of the occupied population is in the informal sector. In some countries, it's 80%, 90%. This is not acceptable. We need much more innovative solutions to bring informal to formal, and it's the time now. And of course, the lack of access to education is much more critical now for a quick recovery than ever. We have been also committing, and believe me, this is not an easy discussion, to sustainable social protection system as business. This is important, and it's important that it's dealt in a manner which is linked to ambitious policies on business environment and employment creation and skills. But sustainable social protection systems right now are not an option, it's a need. Many families are so desperate that they rely on some incomes for their children also to be in a decent situation. That pandemic and its subsequent breakdown has also been putting important focus on supply chains. And Guy was referring precisely to the due diligence approach. And we cannot be in much more coincidence on the need to strengthen the link to the due diligence. I think that there's much progress on that, but it's not still sufficient. But in our effort to build back better, we need to make sure that the framework conditions in which production takes place become also resilient. Supply chains are an important entry point for such an engagement. It's a critical point, but at the end of the day, we need to ensure that the entire economy are in the focus. Research of the Alliance 8.7 have shown that the vast majority of child labor is not just on supply chains, which I want to insist are critical, but are also domestic. I give you the example of North Africa, where 90% of the child labor takes place in domestic context, and it's just 10% on which is linked purely to supply chains. If we want to reach this 90%, we need a much more ambitious entire economy approach. And for that, we need to do better in something that perhaps we were not doing so well, and is collective action, efficient partnerships. We can We have made also some important steps. I mean, precisely in supply chains, we were in coordination with ITU, the International Trade Union Organizations, with global unions like Industrial and the ILO, and we launched an initiative to address the impact of COVID in the garment sector. We committed to support manufacturers to survive the economic disruption caused by the COVID-19, but to protect also workers and individuals with incomes, but focusing mainly also on a middle and long-term solutions linked to social protection schemes. Again, I want to insist, the social protection schemes sustainable will make a difference. I would like to thank, by the way, Wagai right there for the strong support that the ILO took on this important initiative, but more action is needed. I have to say that this year is the anniversary of ILO. We were born a little bit after the ILO was created. Now we are active in other scenarios, but ILO was very, very, very important for us. Perhaps it's not the best year to celebrate our 100th anniversary, but it's also a big opportunity to us as business to show our added value. And our added value, precisely that next year we have the International Year of the Elimination of Child Labor, is linked to our network, our big network. There is a call for action for all of us to determinedly address this grave human rights violation. And as the saying goes, the future starts today. We cannot allow ourselves to go back on this goal, despite the pandemic, and we're going to engage effectively with all of you on critical action. For that, I want to thank also the strong support of our friend Kailash Satyarthi, to move collectively forward. And our network, which is based on 150 countries representing of more than 50 million companies. But more importantly, our network are made of business organizations that are very influential at local level in policies, will be fully committed to increase efforts for a world free of child labor. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Roberto, and then the message from the IOE. I did note your point about cooperating with the International Trade Union Confederation and the idea of some kind of sustainable social protection system that is absolutely necessary, especially in this crisis. What we'd like to do now is move to question and discussions. I do have one question I'd like to read out. Actually, it comes from 30 youth activists from all continents around the world, except I believe Australia, who pose a question to the panelists and to the participants in this program. It's a little general, but I'd like your views on it, and then we can also have some more specific discussion. The youth activists pose this question. Many think that forced labor and slavery ended years ago, especially people who live in countries where child labor isn't as prevalent, even if products made by children are. What would you say to those who think child labor isn't a priority that would shake them to the core about the scale of this injustice and make them act? Interested in anybody's reaction to that? Obviously, this is about really getting those people's attention who maybe haven't looked at this situation in a careful manner, and the fact that there are shocking stories still out there that these young activists have picked up on. I wonder if anybody has a reaction to that question. Let's see. What would you say to those who think child labor isn't a priority that would shake them to the core about the scale of this injustice and make them act? Anybody like to? Yes, Mr. Chano?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I think that child labor is very much of a moral issue, and we cannot shy from it. And it is important that people understand that it may not be a priority in certain countries, but if you look at, you appeal to the moral conscience of the citizens of this world, authorities of this world, I think you're doing part of the job. And it is important that we look at the awareness-raising aspect of the matter. I mean, in Europe, or maybe the average parliamentarian may not witness child labor in their backyard, but if you explain to them that the shoes that they're wearing were made using child labor, then it might set their brains thinking and say, oh, listen, we have to do something about it. And this can spark, I believe, legislative action in terms of lawmaking, in terms of policy making, and budgetary allocations that can be invested in those countries where child labor is prevalent. In the context of development cooperation, you know, if you have specific development funds that are directed and allocated to those countries where there is a need to fight child labor, I think that we can make some progress in this particular regard. So it's a moral issue that has to be brought to the fore that should spark action by the authorities, whether it's legal or otherwise or financial, in order to stem it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from any of the other panelists? Yes, Guy?
Well, just to follow up where Martin left off, and I very much agree with him. You know, I think there are two parts to the question. One is, do people really understand that both child labour and forced labour exist as they really do? It's a question of awareness. And we've got a terrific opportunity next year with the International Year. If we haven't done well enough already in raising awareness and making our messages clearer, let's use the International Year. It's a God-given opportunity. And the second point, and here Martin's absolutely right, now people are at liberty to decide whether they think this is important or not important, but I think any moral conscience would have to give absolute priority to the elimination of child and forced labour. It's just simply something which, if you avert your eyes from it, I think just it's not acceptable. I think there is one thing to be got over still, because I hear it a lot, particularly in relation to child labour, less so in respect to forced labour, that somehow child labour is an inevitable part of, concomitant of, the existence of poverty in the world. And you have to eliminate poverty before you think you can make real progress on child labour. Well, we've had to deal with that argument for a long time. The fact of the matter is that countries at comparable levels of development and wealth development have very different levels of child labour prevalence, and that's a matter of public policy and political commitment. So we can make those differences.
Thank you very much, Ken. We have a question that has come in from one of the viewers, and actually this is directed to Guy, but I think it absolutely really is something that other folks, including Mrs. Irani and also our friends from the IOE could address. It says all of the political actors, employees, workers, NGOs, and international agencies must do their bit against child labor. What kind of international cooperation is needed to achieve real change next year? As Guy had pointed out, is the International Year of Elimination of Child Labor. Ideas about what will really make the change next year, because it's going to be not only that particular issue that has been out there that we have wanted to address and say 2021, we want to make a real effort. But now with COVID, it complicates the opportunity. So interested in people's views on that. What do we need to do next year to achieve real change?
Okay.
Sure. Yes.
Well, I think it's a wide question that I just want to answer with a focused answer. We have been referring to effective cooperation for a while, and we have identified challenges in terms of building trust, better understanding the private sector, using a language which is understandable, having similar rhythms. But at the end of the day, next year, if we want to make a difference, we keep moving the direction from just having individual companies cooperating with international organizations, which is important, but working together in changing the policy set at national level. And I think the Martin for the Interparliamentary Union and also others have referred to that. If you do not change the policies at local level, if you just ratify Convention 182, but you don't have the policies on the ground that are needed, and not necessarily it's a question of resources, sometimes it's just to have the proper framework, you will not make a difference. So where we as business community can make a difference together with international organizations, NGOs, trade unions, is in these effective policies on the ground. How in different countries are different, but we can make a difference, bearing in mind the different circumstances, diversity, etc., but we can help effectively to change these policies.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Any other people who would like to comment on this question of what we need to do next year to really address child labor, year of child labor 2021?
I'd like to come in.
Yes, please, Mr. Irani.
I think that we shouldn't wait for the next year. Action needs to begin now. And I can say this on behalf of the organizations that I lead and I serve, especially in the textile sector. From the previous question, taking away from what Mr. Ida and Martin had to say, I think there has to be, apart from a commitment on behalf of the political actors, a consumer consciousness raised around the issue. Today, at least in the corporate and the industrial manufacturing belts of India, there is an understanding that the Indian government and the Indian parliament has banned child labor, and that penalization and punishment will be the strictest faced by a corporate entity or by a manufacturing unit. Additionally, what I have seen in the Ministry of Textiles is a consciousness amongst producers, amongst exporters, that they want to ensure that their products are labeled as child labor free. And I think that kind of consciousness, when developed amongst business communities, can go a long way. But those individuals who feel that their society is not engulfed with challenges comprising of child labor, there can be a heightened sense of awareness about the products that they consume, whether those products have been untouched by child labor. And I think that cohesive approach between political actors and by corporate leaders and by, like I said, those who are committed to ensuring that our consumption is child labor free, I think a cohesive approach will work. But let's not wait till the next year.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chandan, yes.
Yeah, just quickly, I agree with the Honourable Minister. I don't think we should wait for next year. Of course, next year will be a defining year, and I may not be very familiar with this, but why shouldn't this be an opportunity for us to initiate a discussion on a global compact on child rights and, fighting child labor? Just like there is the global compact on migration or refugees, which compact would involve all segments of society, both official government, parliaments, private sector, civil society, all coming together in a coalition that would be unanimous in stemming child labor, for instance.
Thank you very much, sir. Actually, that raises a question that I had been thinking about, and I'm interested to ask, especially the folks in the room, so to speak, who are on the commerce end of this. I'm interested in what people think about either the new laws, trade laws, or due diligence laws that are starting to crop up in some countries. The EU is looking at something like this, Germany, France. How effective do you think these kinds of moves or these kinds of mechanisms might be in addressing child labor and global supply chains? Interested in anybody's position or view on that? Sure, Roberto.
Okay, as I think Guy referred to that, the non-easy discussion sometimes that we have on global supply chains. I think that we have to overcome also controversies to look at effective results. Due diligence is an area of consensus, which started with the principles of business and human rights already 10 years ago. Next year also will be the anniversary. And we have to put the ambition there to push this agenda. There are many ways of doing that. I would go beyond a mere legal requirement. And I want to be very clear on that. It's not just big multinationals moving on due diligence and also on reporting. It's also governments strengthening what we call the first pillar, which is access to remedy, conditions also to avoid situations like the one that we are still unacceptable living in this world of worse forms of child labor. So at the end of the day, if you do not have the policy mix, whatever you advance in terms of due diligence, legally or not legally, could be very limited, very limited. So yes, many of these initiatives can be welcome. At the end of the day, we need a much broader perspective in order to put the ambition that we need here.
Thank you very much. Any other folks would like to comment on this? Yeah, Kailash ji.
Thank you. We know that this is not an easy topic when we are demanding for the national laws and international laws for due diligence and transparency in supply chain. As Guy rightly pointed out, that it's a bit controversial thing. And as Roberto said, that we have to overcome to that situation and move forward. But one thing I could suggest, even in the midst of this debate, that the governments can ascertain that their procurement from any supplier within the country or from outside should be free of child labor. There should be due diligence in procurement of everything. I have brought this issue before some of the ministers in India, and I got very, very positive response from at least the Minister of Minister of Railways, because Indian Railway is one of the biggest procurers of many supplies. And he started thinking and discussing this idea with others. But unfortunately, this pandemic was outburst, and then the lockdowns came. But I see some sort of welcoming attitude in India to ensure that the ministries would not be procuring any good which is made by child labor or forced labor. Similar conversations I began with other governments in Europe and some other places in Latin America, and I'm getting that response that the government can prove the championship and ensuring that there is no child labor or forced labor in their procured goods. So this is one possibility which we can really push for. But more importantly, we have to create a sense of urgency. We have to have that feeling that they are all our children and we have to protect them. It looks like a moralistic or conscience-like approach, but it's more important that if we do not act now, then we will lose the entire generation and the world cannot afford it. We have to learn that if we allow child labor, we will allow intergenerational poverty, we will allow illiteracy, and we will allow a lot of obstacles in achieving the sustainable development goals. So we can begin like that.
Thank you very much, Kailash ji. We're really up to about an hour in our program here. I did want to do one more thing, but with any other comments or observations about what we've talked about so far? A lot of really important and useful and practical ideas here, which is going to be absolutely essential to achieving the goal of really making 2021 not only the year of elimination of child labor, but also how we really deal with the COVID situation. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to offer Lalita the last word as the representative of the youth here in our program. Lalita, what kind of advice do you have for young people or workers today in this current situation? Any particular views that you have in terms of what young people should be doing in the current picture?
कोरोना टाइम चल रहा है, इसमें सबसे ज्यादा प्रभावित बच्चों की पढ़ाई हुई है, क्योंकि जो स्कूल बंद हो रहे हैं उससे बच्चे स्कूल से ड्रॉप आउट हो रहे हैं और उनका वो बाल मजदूरी में लिप्त हो रहे हैं, इससे वे बाल शोषण के शिकार भी हो रहे हैं। तो मैं चाहती हूँ कि बच्चों की पढ़ाई के लिए गवर्नमेंट कुछ ना कुछ करे।
During this pandemic, children education is the worst affected the most, and I want something the government should do something for the education of children.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all of the stellar cast we've had here, the panel participants. Thank you very much for taking time to be with us today and offer these really important observations and ideas for moving forward. Again, all of your efforts are going to be absolutely critical to being able to address this. And on behalf of the Kailash Satyarthi Children's Foundation and the Global March Against Child Labor, we really appreciate your cooperation, your insights, and your experience with us, sharing your experience with us today. Thank you very, very much, and have a good rest of your morning, day, or evening.
Thank you to the panelists, speakers, and performer today. A sincere thanks to everyone for spending time with us, and we look forward to you rejoining us again tomorrow to hear specifically about the education crisis and the impact of the pandemic on children on the move. Please come back tomorrow at 12 p.m. US Eastern Time, 5 p.m. in the UK, and 9:30 p.m. in India. This concludes today's portion of the summit.
Once again, we raise our voices in celebration, rising up together.